let's go ahead and get to the reason why we're all here, and that's to hear and learn from our good friend and colleague, Dr. Hoepner. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and good friend who's 2 doors down the hall from me. Jerry's a faculty member at UW Eau Claire, has been here for many years. He's a Regents Teaching Excellence Award winner from the UW system, not the university, but the actual entire Wisconsin system. Has done a tremendous amount of work in adult neurogenics teaching and research in aphasia and brain injury and stroke and functional and social outcomes and interactions, and has done a tremendous amount of work on projects. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Jerry. We're going to do as we do with the Distinguished Speaker Series, where we get a chance to hear and listen to Jerry and get some thoughts and ideas. There'll be plenty of time for questions, but like we've done in the past, we want to make sure that the chat doesn't become kind of a parallel stream of side conversations. So of course, comments and thoughts and things, but we also want to make sure that doesn't get to be multiple threads of side conversations while the presentation is happening. So keep your questions and resources and thoughts in your head and write them down, and then we'll have plenty of time to have some discussions at the end. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry. So Jerry, thanks for being on, and turn it to you.
Thank you, Tom, for that kind introduction. And I'm excited to talk to all of you today and share a little bit about my passion for projects. So let's go ahead and get started. And I want to let you know that I've built some flexibility into this presentation. So I kind of have like a short version, and if we want to use a bunch of time to talk, or I have an extended version, so we get to choose our own project today in terms of project-based interventions. So just a couple of disclosures. I'm a member of the podcast committee. I'm a professor at UW Eau Claire. I really want to thank Aphasia Access for inviting me as a distinguished speaker, which seems kind of strange to me because I don't feel all that distinguished, but thank you. I want to do a shout out to my project-based intervention mentors and friends and colleagues, Nick Ben, Melissa Capo, Julie Hart, Peter Muhlenbrook, Lynn Grayson, and Tom Sather do a lot of work together on that type of thing. And then to the groups that I primarily do project-based intervention with, our Blue Gold Brain Injury group and our Thursday Night Poets. So before jumping in, I always like to start with this grounding principle from Mark Ilvasacker, and I think it just fits so well with the life participation approach. In the absence of meaningful engagement in chosen life activities, all interventions will ultimately fail. And I think that it's really important that we begin there when we're thinking about how we approach projects or any intervention for that matter. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the concept of project-based interventions, it may be helpful to think about what the core elements of project-based interventions are and some of the typical treatment targets. Nick Ben and Melissa and Julie and I and Peter have done some work recently on kind of synthesizing what the core elements, treatment aims, and targets are, and mapping that onto the RTSS model. But this is a kind of a quick little nutshell of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of project interventions and the types of things we accomplish. So some of it is focused on skills training and building self-efficacy. And in this case, the project is really the vehicle for all of the other cognitive and communication interventions that we're doing. So the project becomes the context, the real life, tangible context where people interact and where they encounter challenges, when they have the opportunity to work through those challenges with the guidance of peers and with the clinicians. So that includes these ideas of self-selecting goals, self-selecting the project, working on self-regulation, building confidence and skills, as I said, and increasing engagement in tasks. A lot of projects have an element of advocacy and self-empowerment. So you're working on supporting social communication, sharing those personal narratives through the project and through the construction of that project, putting those individuals in that expert role. most projects will have an impact on emotional well-being and quality of life. So they're meant to or intended to promote motivation, to support identity renegotiation and building that sense of self by engaging in meaningful activities and by reducing the demands of impairments in that context. And all of those in a group context, but I would say even when it's an individual project, there is a collaboration between that individual and a number of other individuals, including the clinicians, but other key players as well, family members, create this sense of collaboration and community belonging that is really powerful. They reach goal achievement through that collaboration. They get this sense of connectedness. Often we involve communication partners, and we always try to facilitate these things in meaningful contexts. So one of the things that I find most interesting and powerful about projects is this opportunity to focus on identity and finding self-worth. And we'll talk a little bit about the Levasseur model of social activities in just a second. But there's something about doing something that's not just for yourself. It may be partly for yourself, but it's meant to be to help other people, helps to restore that sense of self and meaning. And that can really serve as a springboard to engage in other things and to take on new projects. I always kind of laugh when I'm working on a project with my groups. We get to the end of the project and people are really excited about what they've accomplished. And they usually say something like, we ought to take a break for a little bit and just kind of do some regular interactions. And then the next session, they say, we've got these 8, 9, 10 projects that we want to do today, right? So there's this sense of one project spurs another project, which is really powerful. And you can see that kind of create this positive momentum in terms of their sense of self and identity. And all of this facilitates that participation and that engagement that we think is so important, we all know is so important, and creates those opportunities for neuroplastic change. So I mentioned this Levasseur model. Nick and Melissa and I and Julie really put a lot of stock into this model in terms of thinking about the types of activities we're doing in projects versus some of the other interventions. Now we can go way down to one end of the extreme and maybe say something like, a language workbook or a cognitive workbook is going to be in that I'm just doing something discrete from other people. But most project-based interventions are kind of reaching the upper tiers where you're doing something with others, you're helping others, and maybe even contributing to society. And again, that's what we really believe is fostering those changes to sense of identity and sense of self. All right, so just to take project-based interventions, let me just take a step back, are a complex intervention, and they're individualized to an individual or to the group. They're selected by those individuals or the group. And it's important to recognize all of those elements, but I'm going to try to simplify this as much as I can. One of the things that I learned from Julie and Melissa in particular is the patience that's needed with projects. So sometimes there are little tasks in a project that to us might seem like we could kick that out in a couple of minutes or in 15 minutes, in an hour, or something like that. The value of projects is putting all of those responsibilities and steps on the individuals that are working through the projects. So it may take longer that way, but you're getting every ounce of value out of that project and out of the opportunities for communication that project creates and the contextualized opportunities. So we begin by the group, the individual identifying an authentic need, problem, or opportunity. And that should really be identified with whatever communication supports are necessary to foster that input from every individual that's involved in the project. once we know a focus for the project, we're looking for their solutions and helping them to brainstorm ideas of what they might do and how they might approach that project. One of the things that we want to accomplish is identifying their expertise, or sometimes developing expertise through the project, right? Through the research that happens within the project, through the collaborative learning that happens within the project, and building upon that expertise. That's a part of, going back to what I said about kind of milking everything out of that project. When they're the expert, we don't need to step in and do things for them, as simple as that might be. We need to be able to encourage them to do that. Engaging those individuals in collaborations with others, that includes family, that includes other professionals, OT, PT, chaplaincy, whoever, and community members, is really powerful because it creates authentic context for those interactions. As I said before, we really think about that project as the vehicle for interventions. This is where you work on social communication. This is where you work on peer interactions and collaborations for the workplace. This is where you problem solve and do your conflict resolution. So this is a space created for these things, and you don't have to create these, you don't have to create a fake opportunity. These are real, authentic, embedded opportunities. So as we're working through the project, one of the skills or strategies that we use is this approach of freeze framing and debriefing along the way. That's the place where we address those challenges. I always tell people ahead of time, we're going to, when we do this, we're going to step on each other's toes. We're going to have disagreements of how to approach things. We're going to misspeak and encounter all kinds of real life challenges. And those are opportunities. Sometimes that can be supported really well through joint video review of the previous week, or of a draft of a video that you're making, or written information. Anything that's more tangible and reviewable, something that's concrete, will give them the ability to kind of set that struggle aside and have a conversation about it. And rather than getting upset with each other, being able to say, I'm not mad at you. I just want to deal with the challenge that we've encountered, and putting that challenge kind of to the side and talking about it as it's a separate thing is a real power of projects. So the last thing that I'll say is project completion is huge. This really creates that sense of closure. This is when that sense of self-worth begins to be solidified, that sense of meaningful contribution and expertise. And there is this sense of collective accomplishment, and that we're in this together. One of the things I notice, many of my project, or all of my project groups, happen with the students that I'm training in clinic. And they establish strong therapeutic alliance, and they do things from the get-go to establish and maintain that alliance. But there's something different when they complete a project together with the group that they're working with. So they achieve this sort of, we're in this together. You'll always be kind of a part of our group, even when you move on to another setting, and when you graduate and become a clinician and all of those different things. You're kind of bonded to this group by that collective accomplishment. And that's just so powerful to see with the students. But the same thing happens with the group members. There's this sense of, we can do this together, and we're in this together. Okay, so this is what I'm going to throw out a little bit of a lightning round, and depending on where we're at, we can potentially move on to some outcomes and quotes from some of these different groups, but I want to be sensitive to opening up time for questions as well. So what do projects look like? I thought it might be helpful to have a sampling of some of the projects that we've done. And I'm happy to share all of these slides and some of the resources and links that are in these slides as well. I can get them to Tom and Todd. But just to give you a sense of some of the different kinds of things that we've done as projects. So here's a little bit of a laundry list, and we'll take a little bit of time to talk about a few of them, but we won't have time to talk about all of them. So fortunately, through a collaboration with Melissa Capo, we've been involved in some pep talks. We've got a couple in the pipeline still, and Melissa's going to laugh because they've been in the pipeline for a while. Projects take time. But that is one of those opportunities. When I was writing a chapter for the Papathanassiou text, our group members wrote about the lived experience and shared their perspective. So that was another project that we did, thinking about what they wanted to represent and how they would include that within the chapter. We've trained individuals and group members for motivational interviewing. One of the things that our group members said at one point, and thinking with this project focus, is that the students come in and the techniques that they use are really helpful for them to have effective interactions. They said, what is that? And how do we learn to do that? So we started a project on training them to do motivational interviewing. And we can talk about a few of those outcomes related to that as well. We did an advocacy project where our group members, and some of you were there or have watched the video, I should say, but we did an academic grand rounds at the Mayo Clinic in Eau Claire, with people sharing the lived experiences and kind of what they hoped practitioners would do to support other individuals with brain injuries in the future. We've made our own, something as simple as making our own group brochures and identifying what that should look like in terms of aphasia friendliness and communication friendliness, but also the content. And we've gone around weeks and weeks on what should be included and what's too much and all of those things, as we would if we were making our own brochures. People have written, we had a series of articles in local magazines on brain injury and recovery. And actually this weekend, our current project is that we are hosting a statewide summit for support groups. So all here at UW Eau Claire, and our group members will facilitate that. And a whole nother area, so that's our Blue Gold brain injury group. And our Thursday Night Poets group, we've done two things. I should step back just a second. We use this group for kind of two purposes. Part of it's just flat out writing poetry, and then the other piece of structure is working on project-based interventions within that Thursday Night Poets. So one of the first projects that we did was to prepare for and host a poetry reading with the help of Aphasia Access in that case. We next published a book called I Don't Think We Did This Right, a chapbook on poems of individuals with brain injuries and aphasia. We were invited to speak at and do a poetry reading at Beyond Baroque in Los Angeles. And I know, thank you, a lot of you were there as well. But again, these are the projects that we prepare people for, and we'll talk a little bit about those outcomes. One of the more recent projects that we've done in the poetry group is really a stakeholder engaged qualitative research. So we actually trained the individuals in the poetry group how to do qualitative analyses. We did a little bit of direct instruction, but primarily implicit kind of learn as you go kind of an approach. And they reviewed their poems about aphasia and about brain injury and recovery, and completed a qualitative analysis that we hope to have in publication sometime not too far in the near future. And then we're working on a second poetry book called Poetry is Chocolate. I'll also say that a lot of the individual projects that we do are really matched to that individual's needs. So someone returning to work, or someone wanting to return to dating, someone looking to make friends, have sort of an increased social presence, those types of things. So we'll often do projects surrounding those topics, and we follow the lead of that individual for how we're going to approach addressing those goals. So we're at about 24 minutes right now. I want to let you know that there are some resources that I'll share with everyone regarding projects, so you can get a tangible sense of what these look like, along with some of the projects that I've been involved in. Melissa Capo's Pep Talks link is here. Nick Ben's brain injury projects videos are here. So some good things to, just get a little exposure to what those projects can look like. And I think the possibilities are really endless. We saw last night in the National Aphasia Night of the Arts that there's so many possibilities in terms of what those projects might be, in terms of drama or dance and photography, so many opportunities, I think. So this is the point where you get to choose your own destiny, so to speak. Happy to have a little bit of a chat, or I can share a few of those quotes and outcomes. So
How about if we take just a minute, Jerry, if you're okay, and let's just give a little bit of time for questions, thoughts, comments. And I know that Jerry has mentioned too, certainly, if you have some thoughts, maybe not even a question, but want to share an experience or something that resonated with you in terms of what Jerry said. So if you wouldn't mind just putting your hand up either visually or with a little icon, that way we can kind of moderate, or you can put something in the chat as well. And then I'll just call around as we go. So Katerina, go ahead if you would, please.
Sure. Thank you. This is just amazing. I just am a huge fan of this approach. I have a comment and a question. So the comment is that I just think, in addition to all the things you like, all the reasons, all the outcomes, all of that, just the fact that you're doing something that's more than, like, you're creating something that you can be proud of, that not everybody can do. I think that is just an added wonderful feature. We were working on doing some filming with people with aphasia and just trying to figure out, like, this is not going to be your normal filming. You're going to look really good, and we're going to really coach you in a way that, not other people will have that experience to do. And I just think that that's one of the things that the projects do for people.
agreed.
My question was about the group dynamics. When you start projects like this, does it take a while to kind of figure out groups, or, like, is it possible to assemble a group fairly quickly of people who don't know each other and get going?
That is a fantastic question. There's definitely kind of a synergy that happens when a group has done projects before and has an expectation for the process. I think one of the things I didn't mention is that first time through, it can feel really uncertain. Like, people will ask, what's a project? And I'm not sure if I like that term, project. And the other thing is that they don't have an expectation for what this is going to look like. How does this roll out until they've seen it? I kind of relate this to your first research project. For those of you who are academics, that, you go through that and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea what's going to happen with this thing. And then you get to the end and there's that sense of, oh, I'm pulling things together and this is starting to make sense. And of course, your mentor had that bird's eye view the entire way, right? And you're developing that bird's eye view. So I think the first time that you pull people together, it takes a while and it takes some education and some discussion, and I would say transparency on the part of the clinicians to say, these are some things you're going to encounter. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have challenges that you encounter. And we want that. We want to have those opportunities to create discussions. The other thing that I'll say is certain groups will gel really quickly. With our poetry group, I think there was a lot of trust built from writing and sharing poems, together, where once we stepped into the project pieces, there was already that mutual trust and admiration, and that facilitated things. In other groups, it takes a while to generate that. The other related piece is that different people will have a different stake or level of interest in different projects. And that's good, right? So there'll be primary players in certain projects because they're really excited, and there'll be more auxiliary players in those projects, but they might take a more primary role in future projects. I'll give a quick example that we have a lawyer in our group who will often, will say, I've got no interest in this project, but I can take care of these pieces because I know, I know this stuff. So she'll often say, I'll volunteer to do the logistic pieces that no one else wants to do, but I don't really want to do the hands-on kind of stuff. So I think figuring that out in those group dynamics initially can be a challenge, but it varies across groups, and it kind of depends on that organic nature of those projects kind of forming. Good question.
There's a couple things in the chat. First, from Ellen, not a question, but just want to say I love this kind of work, and this is a very inspiring presentation. So kudos to you, Jerry, and Ellen, thanks for the comment. And then Melissa, I see you put in the Pep Talks link directly to the YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, it's the new link. It's just been updated, so yes.
Yeah, so you can click on that for examples from a project standpoint.
Awesome.
So before Jerry jumps back in a bit with some of the quotes and things, any other comments, questions that people want to put out or to think on? Yeah, Beth, go ahead.
So we, as part of our programming here in West Texas, we have members who can attend our center 2 or 3 times a week. And so what we try to do to incorporate projects is we look across all programs and we figure out how we can put a project into our typical programming week. So recently, one of the things that we do 4 or 5 times a year is we do an out and about. And so we take our show on the road and we go into a place in the community. We also have a cooking group, monthly cooking group, where we cook a meal together. And then we have a skill building group where we work on more practical things like, handwriting, etc. And we have, a time for them to work on during our technology hour, if they have specific goals in terms of writing, spelling, math, whatever. And so one of the things that we did was we created an opportunity for them to prepare a meal together, create the grocery list, all of the practical things in more of our skill building. Then we had them go into our community, make connections with our local grocer that has a restaurant in the grocery store. So they were able to make those collaborations with the community, educate the community. We broke up into groups, we bought our groceries, we talked through, we paused and we talked about what our challenges were and how we were able to access that to participate and what our barriers were. And then, we had lunch together, we came back. Now this was over the course of several weeks. And we cooked that meal together. And then we rated it and we talked about our challenges and what could go, what went wrong. But that's one example of the projects that we've done that just kind of incorporated the built-in time that we already had, but we used it to complete the project. And we're currently working on a similar kind of situation where we are taking our wood shop group and we're planning the construction of a card box, but we're having to use that skill building to take the pieces apart in that. And then we're going to have our game playing group learn how to teach people the game. And then we're going to sell our card boxes and they'll figure out the unit cost and et cetera. So we try to take what the programming time that we already have in place and figure out how to use that to complete for project completion in a similar way that you're talking about.
That's fantastic, Beth. Thank you for sharing. And so many opportunities with those projects, whether it be the cooking a meal or whether it be the woodworking project that happen from a communication standpoint. I mean, all of the things that you mentioned with writing and reading and so forth happen within those projects, right? So you're looking at writing grocery lists and reading recipes and so forth. So a lot of those opportunities for working on communication are naturally embedded instead of kind of off to the side. So I think that's just a fantastic example of that.
Well, maybe Jerry, if you'd be comfortable sharing a few of the quotes and some of the insights from some of the folks, and then we'll take a few more questions if you're all right with that towards the end.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. So excited to share some of these. And this is from a forthcoming article that contains a few different projects across different programs. So one from Melissa, one from Julie, one from Nick and myself. And my particular part of it is the motivational interviewing training. So talk a little bit about some of those outcomes and share a few quotes that I think are pretty powerful. So one of the things, of course, that people learned was the motivational interviewing skills. And I'll have to tell you that some people pick up on it really quickly, and that's very much like you would expect for, just us as a discipline as well, or any of us who are speech language pathologists, I would say. Some people pick it up really quickly, and some people it's a little bit harder. It's a little bit of a paradigm shift in terms of using these strategies. But they learn strategies over time, some really quickly, and this was a 10-week program, and some a little less quickly. But afterwards, we did structured interviews with individuals, and this is the types of things that they talked about. So if you know a little bit about motivational interviewing, you know that the intent of this is to draw out the person's own reasons for change, their own solutions, and inhibit your own solutions, or writing reflex, we would call it, replacing those with opportunities to elicit that person's ideas. So these are some of the things that they said. It's not about me, it's about them. It's about helping them to find their own solutions. People just need a space to talk through it. It's better when they're talking more than me. Sometimes you just need to get them going. They'll figure it out as they talk. You've got to keep the focus on the person you're helping. When you talk about yourself too much, it takes away from that. I realize now that I used to talk too much. Now I'm more aware of what I'm saying and wait before I jump in. It's important to affirm their feelings. A lot of times they don't have solutions. So-and-so just came into our discussions with all of the solutions, but I don't think she knew it. She just needed to hear that what she said was making sense. And if they say something that doesn't make sense or isn't a good plan, we just ask them questions so they can evaluate it. So just a remarkable change in perspective on the part of these individuals. And this is from that process of kind of going deep into this together. And I think sometimes you're not able to share those things until you have that concrete experience to relate it to. I'll share a little bit about our project advocacy program. That's the presentation about the lived experience that we did to the Mayo Clinic academic grand rounds in Eau Claire. And one of the things I want to say about this experience is that in preparation for that kind of final presentation at the academic grand rounds, our group members did multiple presentations. And I think this is part of the value of the project. So they did dry runs, we call them, at 7 different institutions. And then they did multiple dry runs just within the group. So they'd walk through and they'd get feedback from peers who may not have been speaking. So some individuals had a direct kind of main speaking role. Some felt like they couldn't speak in front of individuals, but they contributed a short video. And other individuals just contributed to the outline and the content of the presentation, what they thought should be covered, and in providing peer feedback through the drafts. So they spoke throughout the US and throughout and actually in London as well, thanks to Nick. And it ultimately spoke to 66 physicians during their presentation. So I'll give you kind of the bird's eye view of outcomes. So the sense of this renewed sense of self, including sense of contribution, pride and self-worth, collective accomplishment, this contribution or impact on the providers, and that included the students that were in the groups that they presented to, but also ultimately the physicians and so forth. And then the final areas were that it was really rewarding and humbling. They felt like they were heard. They were able to share alternate personal narratives and identities. And of course, through this process of multiple iterations and dry runs, they improved their clarity and the conciseness of their expression as well. So just a couple of comments from physicians and how it impacted them. I'll let you read those, and then I'll share some of the more moving comments from participants as well. So in terms of that renewed sense of self, I felt like I could represent our group in my own thoughts on what we wanted to communicate to our providers and others. It gave me this sense of pride, which isn't an everyday thing for me. I thought it was very valuable to my sense of self-worth and my place in the advocacy group. I feel proud of myself, finally. My self-esteem and self-awareness have grown leaps and bounds. I realize how strong I've been in the face of adversity, and I have a lot to offer. I hope to continue to be the voice of my peers, voice with my peers of brain injury. In terms of that collective accomplishment and that pride and self-worth, one person said, I think this is the single most important thing that our group has done. One said, I've never thought I'd be an international speaker, that we'd be international speakers, but we are. In terms of the impact on providers and the future for future individuals with brain injuries, I myself think it was one of the most amazing and humbling things I've ever been a part of. It feels so rewarding when students learning this field hear us and repeat and paraphrase things that we've learned or they've learned from group members. Even if we touch a few of them in a way we've aimed to, then this is merely the tip of the iceberg, because hopefully this will rest in their hearts and minds and be used in their future employments. Just a couple more here. In my eyes, this felt like one of the most positive projects I've worked on. And it's very exciting and humbling to know that we can collaborate to do something so important and needed in the lives, and gives us even more confidence in our post-acquired brain injury lives to speak up when we believe it is very needed. This is one of the greatest things our group has done. It amazes me that we were able to put this together and even making it through the pandemic in this context. So the sense of being heard, we have more to share and give to our community and as well as colleges. I believe that the best person to help a person with a brain injury is another person with a brain injury, which is why support groups are so important. I'll go through just a few comments from the poetry study, and then we'll open it up to questions in a minute or so. So this is our Thursday night poets, and we also did a qualitative interviews after year one. We're now a little more than year two, but these were a few from year one. It is healing me. It is all really helping me now. I'm healing leaps and bounds. Excuse me. It makes me feel like my thoughts are coherent, whereas the rest of the time, I don't feel like my thoughts are coherent. It helps me put my thoughts together. I didn't know I was a poet, also didn't know I was an international speaker, and it's pushing me outside of my comfort zone. I guess I never realized that some of that stuff was in me, and maybe I was trying to get it out, but I just didn't quite know how. And this is just another avenue for that. It helped me to focus my energy, and it's helped me to focus my thoughts more, because my thoughts are so scattered on a daily basis. Like I have trouble with concentration. I have trouble putting words together and that sort of stuff. So when I sit down and I'm actually working on a poem, it's like the words come together miraculously. And I'm like, wait a minute, if I could talk like this, if I could talk like this all the time, I'd be able to really communicate. Unfortunately, life isn't all about poetry, but it has really helped me. It's given me a boost, the boost I need in life to realize that I'm capable of something more than my brain injury is making me capable of. All right, so hopefully those are inspiring, and let's just open it up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, and Jerry, as you're doing that, there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll just read the first one from Ellen, and then if others too, there's one from Katerina as well. But Ellen wrote, a fantastic, inspiring presentation. Just wondering what your best lessons have been in terms of capturing meaningful outcomes. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started?
I will just say that the individuals in those groups continue to teach me every single day. So much more knowledge that I've gained from them than I've gained from all of the other contexts of my learning. And I think being in that context and learning alongside of them is one of the best things that we can do. And really go into it with that mindset that these are the experts and they're going to help me to learn from this process. In terms of those outcomes and measuring outcomes, I think we're becoming more sophisticated in how we do that. I do think there's a great deal of value in the interviews after the fact with individuals. We've also started using goal attainment scales. As a part of our process, we go through collaborative goal setting and collaborative kind of task or project identification, I should say. And then we have really become intentional about having people measure their own outcomes and monitor their own outcomes through this process. And that has been so remarkably valuable. Each of our sessions, we begin by talking about and having people identify their own goals, and just knowing their goals in their own words and being able to articulate them from week to week is powerful. But then being able to measure those outcomes themselves rather than me imposing my interpretations through goal attainment scaling has been really, really a powerful tool. So looking forward to kind of getting some of that information out there eventually too.
Great. There's another question, Katerina, and feel free to jump in off your text, Katerina, here. One question I have is what skills you think are important for clinicians in training to have and learn about before they are able to lead project-based intervention?
Yeah, that almost goes back to the question about kind of gelling with the group too, because I think the first time that clinicians do it, they kind of feel lost. That same kind of metaphor that I use for the first time you do a research project kind of thing, like you just don't know where you're going. The first time you do it, it's a little bit hard to have that bird's eye view. So again, the transparency that we can provide by describing what that looks like and the kinds of things that they will encounter is really important. And I think if you have the opportunity to collaborate with someone who has done a project before, I think that's helpful because having that bird's eye view can be really helpful. But finding ways to just lay out as much of that kind of that path or that trip, so to speak, in terms of the project is really important.
There's another question, Jerry, and then we'll open it up too if others have. In the individual text here, could you talk about care partners' role in project-based interventions, and what is the role, and is it direct to the care partner, or is it in a supportive role of the individual with brain injury?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. It's funny because Melissa, I know Melissa's here, and I don't know if Julie's here, but we're currently on an advising board for Lynn Grayson's doctoral research, and she's doing family-based, project-based interventions. So just directly with the individual and their partners and their spouses, their adult children, other family members, and so forth. So we're really, really excited to see how, what direction that gives in terms of that piece. Many times it can certainly be directly in the project as one of the group members, and I think that's an ideal possibility. And I'm like I said, I'm really excited to see where that takes Lynn and what knowledge we get from that. But the other piece is, and we've become really conscientious about doing recaps after all of our sessions, and the recaps serve a few different purposes. They provide some education about what we did and about why we did it. They serve to kind of mark key information in terms of what happened that particular day. And we try to put this in a communication friendly format where it's not exhaustive information, but it is bulleted information that's accessible to them. And then kind of a list of steps for next time. Sometimes the list of steps for next time includes homework or things for them to consider before that next group. Sometimes it's just, here's what's coming next, or a little bit of both. But from a partner standpoint, that can be really powerful in terms of carrying things over from week to week and having them be a part of that process, whether directly or not. It's interesting from Nick's work, he found that partners that weren't even directly involved in the sessions had positive outcomes because of that type of communication. So that carryover and generalization happens even when there's not that direct presence in sessions. And I think that communication, those, what I would say, aphasia-friendly, communication-friendly recaps that we do are really important. Really, it's just a counseling kind of technique where you're passing that along, said, this is what we did, this is your role, this is the steps that we did, and here's what's coming next, can be really powerful.
Ellen has a point, and maybe you can comment more, Jerry, too, about goal attainment scaling. So I love the idea of goal attainment scales, huge fan of qualitative interviews, but they are very time consuming. The outcomes you're sharing today remind me of the goals of self-managed care approaches.
Absolutely. I could show you maybe I'll see if I can find this. As I'm thinking through this, I have a slide that we often use for kind of thinking about how to do goal attainment scaling, which I think might be really helpful just to make it a little bit more concrete. So just give me 1 second if you don't mind.
Yeah, and while you're doing it, your point, Ellen, too, that idea of qualitative interviewing and goal attainment scaling, and that can, not just from a time standpoint, but also efficiency and self-reflection, building in the self-reflection that comes with goal attainment, as opposed to, maybe the time and effort energy of the entire interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to just pull that up here in a second and share screen. So this is kind of the framework that we use. So part of our idea is that we should set goals together, we should measure and monitor them together, and then we ask them to recall them each week so that they know what their goals are. We set this overarching goal framed in the client or family's words. So we just have them write it. Sometimes we need to rework it so that it's measurable and those kinds of things, but essentially they write it. The way that we figure out what our ultimate goal is having a conversation. Often we use the approach from solution focused brief therapy of kind of dream a little. If you woke up tomorrow and everything was great, what would that look like? When we're thinking about individual goals, when we're thinking about group goals, we're thinking ultimately, what do you want this project to accomplish? So that's our +5 or +2, depending on how you do those scales. And then we kind of work backwards towards where they're at right now in terms of what they've accomplished and what some reasonable increments are in between. And since they've defined what those increments are, we can use that. So when we think about someone makes a rating on a given day that says, oh, I think I'm a +4, and we say, I think you're not, right? We don't have to say that. We can just say, okay, well, here are the criteria for the +4. Tell me why you think we're there right now. And that alone can allow them to say, oh yeah, you're right. It's more like a +3 because this is the step that we're at. And that can be really helpful for all of the goals that are going on alongside of that project. And those are usually things like something related to how effectively they're communicating, or a particular strategy that they want to work on. So those are built into that. So they may be individual goals on expression or on non-interrupting, or all kinds of different things like that. But hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, definitely. Okay, we have time for one last question or comment, and then we try to button this up by about 5 to the hour. So we're actually just about there. I believe if you have questions, comments, concerns, I know that Jerry would be more than happy to talk with you about those and take those questions, comments, and email and so on. And he's put forth a bunch of resources as well. So on behalf of Aphasia Access, on behalf of the Distinguished Speaker Series, Jerry, thank you very much for a really excellent presentation that's got us all thinking in ways that we can provide practical participation-based approaches and intervention. So thank you for your time and for your insights on this particular topic. A couple of things we're going to put in the chat, crew, is I'm just going to drop in a couple reminders here. One is to the Leadership Summit. So the link is there to register for that. We also have Aphasia Access Breakfast happening on the 17th. And then lastly, there is also a link to the LPAA Knowledge Certification Badge. So amidst the many kudos to you, Jerry, lots of great comments in the chat about the quality and exceptionality of the presentation and the ideas. There's a couple of Aphasia Access links as well. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the doors on the room. So thank you all for being here and for being a part of this, for being members of Aphasia Access. And once again, thank you, Jerry, for this excellent presentation. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care. Hope to see you at ASHA.